I don't even know where to begin. It feels like everything that happened in the last few years has been one long, slow decline, and now, looking back, I can see it all so clearly. The small cracks in our marriage that we both ignored, the distance that grew between us, and the betrayal that followed. It feels like a blur, but when I focus, I can almost relive it. The pain, the guilt, the anger, all of it comes rushing back, and I still don't know if it was all worth it. I guess I should start at the beginning. Ethan and I, we had a good life. No, scratch that, we had a great life. When we first met, everything just clicked. We were in sync, and every day was an adventure. He was ambitious, driven, and I loved that about him. He made me feel special, like I was the only one who mattered. But somewhere along the way, things changed. When Ethan started to climb the corporate ladder, I noticed something shifting. He became consumed by his work. The late nights, the endless meetings, the business trips, they all took a toll on him, and I didn't know how to deal with it. At first, I tried to be understanding. I told myself that his career was important, that it was just a phase. But as time went on, the evenings that used to be hours turned into silent dinners. No more laughter, no more meaningful conversations. I would sit across from him at the dinner table, and he wouldn't even look up from his phone. It felt like I was invisible. I tried talking to him about it, of course. I begged him to spend more time with me, to show me that I mattered. But every time I brought it up, he would brush me off, saying he was too tired, or had too much on his plate. And as much as I wanted to scream, I stayed quiet. I convinced myself that if I just gave him space, things would get better. But they didn't. One night, I sat in our living room, staring at the empty space between us. Ethan was on the couch, buried in his laptop, and I couldn't help but wonder where we went wrong. I wanted to talk to him, to tell him how I felt, but what was the point? He wouldn't listen anyway. He hadn't been listening for months. That's when I met Dylan. Dylan Hayes was new at work. I remember the first time I saw him. He had this charm about him, something effortless. He was confident, but not in a cocky way. More like he knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove anything to anyone. We didn't talk much at first, but he'd always greet me with that easy smile. I'll admit, I found myself looking forward to seeing him in the office. It was the first time in a long while that someone made me feel like I mattered. One day, he asked me if I wanted to grab lunch. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if it was a good idea, considering my marriage, but something about him felt different. So, I agreed. We talked about work at first, but then the conversation shifted. Dylan asked me about my life outside the office, about my hobbies, my family, my marriage. At first, I was hesitant, but as he listened, really listened, I found myself opening up. I told him about the loneliness I felt at home, how Ethan and I had grown apart. I didn't mean to unload all of that on him, but he just had this way of making me feel like I wasn't burdening him. Over the next few weeks, we started spending more time together. We'd have lunch almost every day, attend meetings together, and chat during breaks. Dylan was always there, offering advice or just listening when I needed to vent. And the more we talked, the more I realized how much I'd been craving someone who actually listened to me. But it didn't stop there. Dylan started showing an interest in my personal life in ways Ethan never did. He'd remember little details about our conversations and ask about them days later. He remembered my favorite book, the song that made me cry, my childhood memories. He saw me, really saw me, and that felt like something I hadn't experienced in a long time. One evening, after a long day at the office, Dylan invited me to dinner. I wasn't sure at first, but I agreed. We went to a little bistro downtown, the kind of place I would have loved to go to with Ethan. But now, here I was with Dylan, sitting across from him, feeling an unexpected sense of connection. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Dylan was funny, intelligent, and easy to talk to. For the first time in months, I felt like I was enjoying myself. I didn't have to put up a front or hide my frustrations. With Dylan, I was just me, and he seemed to appreciate that. By the end of the night, I realized I had never laughed so much in ages. It wasn't just the dinner that lingered in my mind. It was the way he made me feel. I felt special, understood, and wanted. Ethan hadn't made me feel that way in so long. The next few weeks were a blur of late-night talks, shared lunches, and moments of closeness I hadn't felt in a long time. I tried to ignore the growing attraction I had for Dylan. I told myself that I was just grateful for his friendship, that it was harmless. But I couldn't deny the truth anymore. I was drawn to him, and that's when it happened. One night, after we'd gone out for drinks with a group from the office, Dylan walked me to my car. We stood there for a moment, awkward silence between us, before he reached out and touched my arm. It was innocent at first, but then, in the blink of an eye, his lips were on mine. I don't know what came over me. I should have pushed him away. I should have stopped it right there, but I didn't. Instead, I kissed him back, feeling a rush of excitement mixed with guilt. Guilt because I knew I was betraying Ethan, but excitement because, for the first time in a long time, someone was making me feel alive. We broke apart, both of us breathing heavily. Dylan looked at me, his eyes full of questions, but I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. I told myself it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I had crossed a line, and I couldn't go back. The first thing I noticed was how distant Marissa had become. At first, I chalked it up to work, but after a while, I couldn't ignore the signs. She was spending more time on her phone, texting late into the night, and I could feel the gap widening between us. She would come home, tell me she had a late meeting or another work event, and I would nod, trying to hide the growing suspicion inside me. I had to admit, I was frustrated. But more than that, I was scared. Scared that I was losing her. Scared that I was losing the woman I'd once known. One night, when she was taking a shower, I picked up her phone from the coffee table. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but a part of me couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. I wanted to see if there was any truth to the idea that she was slipping away from me. I didn't expect to find anything, but as I scrolled through her messages, my heart dropped. There they were, text messages from Dylan, the new guy at her work, the guy who'd been so charming, so attentive, and who had made her smile in ways I hadn't seen in years. I told myself it was harmless at first, maybe just a friendship, but the longer I read, the clearer it became. The messages were flirtatious, intimate, suggestive. Words like, "I can't stop thinking about you," and "You're so beautiful, I can't wait to see you again." It was all there, plain as day. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through more messages, images, laugh emojis, and words that made my stomach churn. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind? The thought of it made my blood boil, but there was another feeling too. Heartbreak. I could feel the weight of betrayal sinking into my chest. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was undeniable. I set the phone back down before she came out, my mind racing. I kept asking myself if it could be a mistake, if there was some explanation for what I had seen. But deep down, I knew. I knew it was real. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, the truth hanging over me like a cloud I couldn't escape. The anger, the disbelief, it all hit me at once, and I felt like I was drowning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of those messages kept flashing in my mind. I wanted to confront her, to yell and scream, to demand answers. But I didn't. I couldn't. It was as if I was paralyzed by the weight of what I had discovered. I didn't know what to do with the truth, and worse, I didn't know how to face her. The next day, I found myself at Jace's place. He was the one person who had always been there for me. We'd known each other since we were kids, and he was the closest thing I had to a brother. I needed to talk to someone, needed advice, someone who wouldn't judge me for what I was about to say. When I told him what I had found, the look on his face was a mixture of sympathy and disbelief. He'd always thought Marissa was a bit cold, but he never imagined she'd do something like this. After listening to me vent for a while, Jace leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the armrest. His expression was serious. "You know, man," he said, his voice low, "I get it. You're hurt. You feel betrayed. But you need to think about this. You need to think about what you want out of this." I looked at him, my heart racing. I want the truth. I want to know why. I want to know how she could do this to me. Jace nodded. "Yeah, but more than that, you need to figure out if you're going to salvage this relationship or if you're done. You need to think about whether it's worth fighting for." I didn't have an answer for that. I was too angry, too broken to make any decisions in that moment. But Jace wasn't done. "You're a businessman, Ethan," he said, leaning forward, his voice becoming more intense. "You know how to take control of a situation. You've worked hard for everything you have. Don't let her get away with this. Don't let her think she can do whatever she wants and walk away without consequences." I frowned, not fully understanding what he meant. "What are you saying?" Jace smirked, almost coldly. "I'm saying, maybe it's time to turn the tables. Make her feel the pain she caused you. Make her see what it's like when you're the one who's in control." The idea hit me like a ton of bricks. At first, it seemed absurd. Revenge? But then, as Jace continued talking, I started to see the logic behind it. Marissa had been the one to betray me, the one to pull away. She had hurt me, and now, I had a chance to hurt her back. It wasn't about getting even, or at least that's what I told myself. It was about showing her that she couldn't just destroy our marriage and walk away without understanding the cost. Jace wasn't wrong. I had been passive for so long, letting her drift further away, not speaking up when I should have. Maybe this was my chance to take control again, to make her realize how far she had pushed me. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I didn't just want to confront her. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her actions. And I knew exactly how I could do it. I hadn't spoken to Avery much in recent years. She'd always been the quieter one, the one who lived in Marissa's shadow. But I had noticed things about her, little things that I hadn't paid attention to before. She had always been a little too interested in me, even when we were just friends. I had ignored it, but now, I couldn't. What if she was the key? What if I could use Avery to make Marissa feel the consequences of what she had done? The thought of it sent a shiver down my spine, but I knew deep down it was the only way to truly make her understand the pain she had caused. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I made my decision. I was going to confront Marissa, but I was going to do it in a way that would break her, just like she had broken me. And I would make sure she never forgot it. It felt like the plan was coming together. I had spent so many nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if what I was doing was the right thing. But there was no going back now. Marissa had crossed the line, and now it was my turn. My revenge would be a slow burn, something she would feel every day, and it would start with her sister, Avery. Avery had always been in the background. She was the quiet one, the one who lived under Marissa's shadow. Marissa was the successful, confident one, and Avery was often overlooked. I never thought much about it before, but as I spent more time with her, I began to see how much she craved attention, how much she wanted to be seen. I didn't see her as a threat at first, but I began to realize something. Avery was vulnerable. She was lonely, and I was the one who was there. I hadn't planned it, but it felt like fate had given me the perfect opportunity. I started spending more time with Avery, under the guise of being supportive. I knew she'd always been a little insecure, living in Marissa's shadow, and I could see how desperate she was for validation. I listened to her, paid attention to the small things that mattered to her, and soon, I was the one she turned to when she needed someone to talk to. Our conversations started off simple, about her career, her insecurities, her strained relationship with Marissa. She told me about how she always felt like the second choice in her family, how Marissa had always been the golden child, the one who had it all together. Avery confessed to me how she felt invisible at times, how no one seemed to appreciate her for who she really was. I could see the pain in her eyes, and I felt a strange connection to her, not because I cared for her in any real way, but because I knew that I had the power to give her something that she'd never had before, attention. And as much as I hated myself for it, I began to enjoy it. She had become my pawn, and I was playing my part well. One evening, after a long talk about family and relationships, something changed. It was a quiet night, the kind where everything feels too still. We were sitting on the couch in the living room, and there was this tension in the air, something unspoken but undeniable. Our eyes met, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a calculated move at first, it just happened. But once it did, I could feel everything inside me shift. Avery didn't pull away. Instead, she kissed me back, hesitating at first but then deepening the kiss. It felt like we were two people who had both been starving for attention, for affection, for something more. And in that moment, we fed into it. Afterward, we pulled away from each other, both of us breathless, both of us knowing that what we'd just done could never be undone. We looked at each other, guilt written all over our faces, but there was also a spark, a dangerous, electrifying connection that neither of us could ignore. The next day, we tried to pretend nothing had happened, but the chemistry between us was undeniable, and before long, we found ourselves sneaking around, meeting in secret. We told ourselves it was just a fling, just a mistake. But deep down, we both knew what was happening. It was inevitable. The lines between right and wrong blurred, and all that was left was the thrill of the forbidden. I didn't feel guilty. Not anymore. The more time I spent with Avery, the more I realized that I was doing exactly what I needed to do. This wasn't just about hurting Marissa. It was about showing her what it felt like to be betrayed, to be discarded. I wanted her to feel the pain I'd felt, to understand that there were consequences to her actions. Marissa, meanwhile, started to notice things. She was smart, and I could see it in her eyes. The suspicion was growing. I caught her watching me and Avery more than once, her gaze lingering a little too long. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she could feel the shift. There was something different between me and her sister, something unspoken that she was starting to sense. Her behavior began to change, too. She was distant, colder, almost as if she were waiting for the inevitable to happen. She asked me about my day more often, but I could tell she wasn't asking out of concern. She was looking for answers, testing me, trying to figure out what I was hiding. And that's when I decided to start dropping subtle hints, just enough to let her know that I was no longer hers. It wasn't a full confrontation, but it was enough to make her feel uneasy. I would act distant toward her, colder than usual. When she asked me about Avery, I'd brush it off, but there was always a certain glint in my eye, a look I couldn't hide. I began to make my affection for Avery more visible. I'd touch her arm when we were in the same room, smile at her in ways I hadn't smiled at Marissa in years. Every time Marissa looked at me, I could see the hurt in her eyes. She didn't know for sure, but she felt it. She knew something was happening, and it was eating her alive. I could feel her inner struggle, the guilt that weighed on her shoulders every time she saw me with Avery. The thought that I might be doing to her what she had done to me gnawed at her, and that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted her to know that she had no control over this anymore, that she had lost everything. I was playing a dangerous game, but it was the only game that mattered now. Every word, every touch, every glance was a carefully calculated move in my plan to make her understand the depth of her betrayal, and I wasn't going to stop until she felt it in every corner of her soul. The path I had chosen wasn't easy, but I was in too deep to back out now. Every step I took with Avery, every lie I told, was part of something bigger, a reckoning that Marissa had coming, and I wasn't going to let her off the hook. Not this time. It was time. I could feel it in my bones. The months of planning, the carefully orchestrated moves, had all led up to this moment. The family gathering would be the stage, and Marissa would be the audience to her own downfall. I had told myself I wouldn't back down, but when I saw the looks on their faces, when I saw how easily the game was playing out, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. This was the moment when everything would come crashing down, and I was the one in control. I had arranged for everyone to come over for the holiday, a perfect excuse to gather the family. Marissa's family, my family, everyone who needed to witness the wreckage. The house was full of warmth, laughter, and the sound of clinking glasses, but underneath it all, there was a tension simmering, waiting to boil over. I could feel the eyes on me, on Avery, and I knew Marissa felt it too. She couldn't figure out what was wrong, but the unease in her eyes was impossible to miss. Throughout the evening, I made sure to let the signal slip. Subtle touches, lingering looks, shared private jokes with Avery. It wasn't blatant, but it was enough. It didn't take long before I saw the change in Marissa. Her eyes darted between us, then away, and I knew she was putting the pieces together. She watched us interact with a growing sense of discomfort, and it felt good. Every moment of confusion she felt was another small victory for me. As the night went on, I casually dropped the words that had been building inside me, waiting for the perfect moment. I made sure Marissa heard them loud and clear, as if letting her in on a secret she hadn't figured out yet. Funny how easy it is to find someone who listens, someone who understands you, I said, my voice just loud enough for her to catch. Avery tensed, but she didn't look at Marissa. I could feel the weight of the words sink in. I let a beat of silence pass before adding, I never thought I'd find such comfort in the arms of someone so close to home. The words were a punch to the gut. Marissa's face went pale, her eyes narrowing as the realization dawned on her. I watched as her expression shifted from disbelief to horror, and in that moment, I knew I had her. The silent understanding between Avery and me hung in the air, clear for everyone to see, but no one dared to say it aloud. Marissa couldn't contain herself anymore. The shock, the humiliation, it all hit her like a freight train. She stood up abruptly, her face flushed with rage and hurt, and without another word, she stormed out of the room, tears already streaming down her face. The room was silent. The family stood frozen, unsure of what to say or do, their eyes flicking nervously between me and Avery, who looked as though she wanted to disappear. The tension was suffocating. I didn't even care about their reactions. The only thing that mattered was the pain I had caused Marissa. I watched as she retreated to a bedroom, her sobs echoing through the house. My heart should have ached for her, but it didn't. Instead, it swelled with satisfaction. I didn't wait long before following her. When I found her, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, her body trembling with anger and disbelief. I tried to keep my composure, but the truth was, I was enjoying this. You want answers? I said coldly, my voice low. You destroyed our marriage, Marissa. You had an affair, and now I'm just finishing it. Her voice was shaky, but there was fury in her eyes. How could you do this to me? With her, my sister? You used her as a weapon against me. You've destroyed everything. Everything we built. It's all gone. I could see her spiraling, her world unraveling with every word. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me falter. I had no regret, no second thoughts. She had pushed me too far. I had tried to salvage things, but now I understood. She didn't care about me. She never had. I stood there, watching her, letting her absorb the full force of my words. You've got no one to blame but yourself, Marissa. You made your choice first. Now it's my turn. Her eyes flashed with betrayal, but I didn't feel anything. The anger she'd felt when she first saw me and Avery was nothing compared to the anger I'd been carrying for months. I had no sympathy for her now. As Marissa locked herself away in the bedroom, I returned to the gathering. The rest of the family was still processing what had just unfolded, the tension thick in the air. But it didn't matter. I had done what I needed to do. The damage was already done, and now it would spread. By the time the evening ended, the gossip had already begun. People had witnessed Marissa's breakdown, and within hours, the story was everywhere. The affair, the public humiliation, it all became public knowledge. I could already imagine how her colleagues would react. Her professional reputation was in tatters, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The whispers at work would spread like wildfire. Her colleagues, who had once admired her, now looked at her with disdain. Her polished image, the one she had carefully crafted for years, was shattered. People no longer saw her as the successful, confident woman. They saw her as a joke, someone who had been caught in a web of lies. But what about Avery? I saw the guilt in her eyes the next time we were alone. She had tried to justify her actions, told herself it was just something that happened, but she couldn't ignore the fallout anymore. She had never imagined how much pain this would cause, how much destruction it would leave in its wake. She reached out to Marissa, but it was pointless. Marissa refused to see her, to even speak to her. The sisterhood, already fragile, was now shattered beyond repair. Avery had betrayed her in the worst possible way. No explanation, no apology, could undo what had been done. And as for me, I was left standing in the wreckage, finally feeling the weight of my revenge. But in a strange way, I had won. I had broken her. I had broken them both. The divorce papers came a few weeks after the family gathering, though the process had already begun before then. I didn't expect it to be easy. Nothing about this situation was ever going to be easy. But I also didn't expect it to be this messy, this drawn out. I thought that once Marissa and I were finally facing the reality of our marriage's end, I would feel satisfaction, some sort of triumph. But that feeling never came. Instead, it was like stepping into a cold void. Marissa, humiliated and broken, agreed to the divorce after a few heated, tear-filled arguments. She couldn't handle the weight of the betrayal anymore, not just from me, but from her own sister. The emotional scars from both the affair and my calculated revenge were too deep. She had nothing left. There were days when I almost felt sorry for her, but then I'd remember what she had done to me, how she had torn us apart, and that sympathy evaporated. But as the legal proceedings dragged on, I started to realize just how deep the wounds really were. Marissa accused me of emotional cruelty. I'd never seen it coming, but in her broken state, she tried to shift the blame, to turn the tables. She painted me as the villain who had manipulated her, who had forced her hand. And maybe she was right in some way, but I didn't care. I had wanted her to suffer, and now she was. I wanted full custody of the children. They were the only thing I had left from the wreckage of our marriage. Marissa's emotional instability was a weapon I wielded in the courtroom, and the lawyers fought tooth and nail. But every day, it felt more like a battle to assert control over a life that was slipping away from me. I had one, but what was the cost? And then there was the loneliness. In my pursuit of revenge, I had alienated everyone around me. I had pushed Marissa away, destroyed my relationship with Avery, and even my friends couldn't look at me the same way. It was as if the more I had taken from her, the more I had lost of myself. My friends didn't know how to talk to me anymore. I could feel them pulling away, uncertain of who I had become. I had destroyed my family, and in the process, I had destroyed the person I was. The victory was hollow, and no matter how much I tried to fill the emptiness with work, with casual encounters, nothing worked. It didn't matter what I did. I was still alone. Avery's struggle was no easier. The guilt that had settled in her chest was a constant weight, suffocating her every day. She couldn't look at herself without seeing the destruction she had caused. The love and attention I had given her were fleeting, empty, and now she was left with nothing but regret. She tried to reach out to Marissa, hoping for forgiveness, but Marissa had no room for her. The bond they once had, now shattered beyond repair, was gone. No words could fix what had been broken. Avery was on her own. It hurt her deeply, seeing Marissa refuse to even speak to her. She had never thought it would come to this. At first, she had justified her actions, told herself it was just a mistake, just a brief moment of weakness. But now, she saw the full extent of her actions. She had betrayed her sister, and in doing so, had destroyed any chance of reconciliation. There was no going back. Avery became a shell of who she had been, withdrawing from everyone. She spent long nights alone, contemplating what she had done, and eventually sought therapy, hoping it would help her work through the guilt. But it was never enough. The weight of her betrayal sat on her chest, and no amount of therapy could take it away. In the end, she decided to leave town, hoping that distance would give her the space to rebuild her life. But the pain of what she had done would never truly go away. As for me, I was left in a cold, empty house. The silence of the rooms I had once shared with Marissa felt louder than any argument. The walls that had once been filled with the sound of life, laughter, love, even the occasional argument, were now silent. Avery wasn't around anymore, and though I hadn't expected our relationship to last, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something important. It wasn't just the affair, or even the revenge. It was everything. The intimacy we shared had become a constant reminder of the manipulation I had orchestrated. It didn't feel victorious anymore. It felt like an anchor dragging me down. I tried to bury the emptiness in work, filling my days with meetings, numbers, and the hollow satisfaction of professional success. But it never worked. No matter how much I achieved, there was nothing left to fill the space inside me. I was alone, surrounded by the wreckage of everything I had destroyed. My friends, those I hadn't pushed away, had stopped calling. They didn't know what to say to me anymore. And deep down, I knew they were right to stay away. I had become someone I didn't even recognize. The divorce, the betrayal, the manipulation. It all seemed so clear in the moment. But now, as I sat in the ruins of my life, I realized the truth. Revenge doesn't heal you. It doesn't make you stronger. It only leaves you with the broken pieces of a life you once thought you had control over. I had wanted to make Marissa feel what I had felt, betrayed, humiliated, and broken. But in doing so, I had become the very thing I despised. I had lost my sense of self, my family, and any hope of redemption. The life I had once known was gone, and in its place was only the bitter taste of regret. In the end, there was no peace. There was no satisfaction. There was only emptiness. I had set out to destroy Marissa, but in the process, I had destroyed myself. And now, all I had left were the pieces of a life I could never put back together.